G'day fans and welcome to another exciting episode of Sci-Fi Zone. As you can clearly see, I'm missing a Claire, but I've gained a dude. I actually have a good old MPS who's joining us for the first time in months. Dude, how are you going?
All right, I'm okay. I noticed, well, in fact, you didn't invite me, I just decided to crash. So, yeah. Good to be here again.
Okay, sounds like your audio sounds a bit scratchy there, old son. Yeah, it's hopefully everybody else is hearing it all okie dokie.
Probably just me with my nerves. I've never been on TV. Hi, Mum, are you there? You see me on TV?
Very, very, very good stuff. And so there you go. Good old Thomas has joined us. Yes, well done. G'day, guys. How are we all? All right, now, before we kick everything off and I've introduced my dude, I've got something I've got to clarify from last week. And that, of course, means that I have to have one of these. So it's our first ever bone of contention from last week, which is an absolute hysterical one, if I do say so myself. So this is what happened last week. We were talking about the show you might recall. Now, Mark Dunn mentioned about the fact that he was glued to the TV as a kid, especially when Diana was seen eating a rat. And of course, I corrected him straight away and said, well, it wasn't Diana eating a rat. It was a character called Stephen. And as it turned out, I was correct, right? As I am, because I'm, as you can never out-nerd the nerd. But as it turned out, we were both wrong. It wasn't a rat. It was a mouse. And I should have realized it at the time because I got this thing for mice in the show. So if you remember the final battle when Gary, I think it is, going, Mosies. So, yes. So to a large degree, we were both wrong. So there you go. And very, very, very cool. So, dude, can you just say something for me? Because it sounds like your audio is a bit scratchy over there.
Okay, I can say whatever you want. I can recite pie to blueberry, apple, strawberry, raspberry. Is it still scratchy or is it just me? Is it the old...
Yeah, okay, all right. And yes, Mr. Vol, you are right, is the dynamic duo, your dying being the operative word. Very, very cool. All right, so we're not sure what your potential issue could be with the audio, but yes, you're right, Colin. Claire is looking very, very different. So MPS isn't as cool as Claire, but he will do for the time being.
I got my hair cut and styled differently this week.
Okay, no worries. So, yeah, Thomas has said your audio is scratchy. We're just going to have to plow through it because we didn't get a chance to sort of do an audio test before we came on board. And I did call MPS up at relatively the last minute. So we will plow on accordingly. Now, so normally we cover off what's been happening in the past week from a flying perspective. And as it turned out, MPS has got an absolute ripper he's got to share regarding a movie you watched like the night before yesterday or whatever it was. MPS, dude, tell us all about this fantastic movie that you saw.
Okay, it's new. It's this year. It's on Netflix. It stars Bruce Willis, and it's total crap. So, the film is bad when someone like Bruce Willis, who has A-list stardom factor, have a look at the poster. Second billing. Okay, it doesn't end well for anyone. Like the story. This is a story that is so bad. I have so many arguments against Star Wars and vehicles and that sort of thing. This is a movie set in 54 or somewhere along like the 20th century. And guess what? They still use real bullets to shoot the aliens, and they still drive cars. Like, come on, guys. This is like a cheaper than B grade 80s type film that they've just, for some reason, managed to get Bruce Willis in there, and his character is just as boring as bats. So, yeah, if you've got 90 minutes spare, don't watch this film. Like, there are some average moments, but towards the end, it gets confusing as to what you're sort of watching and why there's this first contact. And it's just, I think the only good thing about this film is there's an Aussie girl who plays a bit of a tech head in there, and she's really good. I can't remember her name.
Ironically, her name is Adelaide, which was born in West Australia.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and she's actually quite good in the film. The rest are all sort of, it's almost like a student film, but someone's got a big name, oh, my uncle's Bruce Willis, so he'll do it for next to nothing. It's just, yeah, save you 90 minutes and go and, nail your feet to the ground or something. I don't know, just anything but that. So yeah, that was my 90 minutes on Saturday night spent.
So even Ads has said it's a shocker, so I totally agree with that. It's kind of funny because I look at the thing, and the first thing that strikes me is they've clearly gone completely Photoshop nuts on the poster. And with the outfits on the right-hand side, it's like the 3D printers have been working overtime. So, yes, absolutely fantastic. So
the dumb thing about it is you've got 25th century technology. You can open your mind up to have almost anything, and yet they've still got modern day version tech sort of suits. And it sort of runs in like someone said, oh, imagine what will happen in 10 years' time. It's like, no, you guys have really missed the ball on this. You can make these suits super awesome. There's a scene where they jump from Earth to another planet, and instead of having like even small rocket packs on these suits, they're free falling like just through space. It's like, come on, guys, a bit of ingenuity, a bit of, as would agree with me, a bit of PS wouldn't have gone astray.
very, 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 very cool. So hang on. Actually, it's very funny. I read a review of the movie, and one guy said Bruce Willis phoned in his performance. Yeah. So I reckon that was actually quite funny. So, but you are right though. The fact that he's a second billing, what does that tell you about his status? So it is not that flash. So there you go. And I see if he sees best, well, he can't. Got to cut the guy some slack there. Bruce Willis has done some fantastic stuff in his time, and I agree with Gavin that Adelaide's parents must have been out of whack. So maybe they were sort of driving across the Nullarbor when they're about to give birth and just cruising into West Australia at the wrong time. So there you go. We'll keep an eye on MPS's audio because you are coming through very, very scratchy. And if it gets too bad, I might get you to disconnect and reconnect, dude. So we'll see what happens regarding that. Okay. Very, very cool. For myself, just two things. The very first one, obviously, good old William Shatner, as we all know, went up to space last week and came back again within like 15 minutes. And I did actually like this photo. He had all the red shirts around him, and he's the one who's not wearing a red shirt. I reckon that's absolutely hysterical. So I reckon they made me people around him may have been quaking in their stylish yet affordable boots. What can I say? Hey, very, very cool. And for William, you'll appreciate this, old son. I binge watched the second season of War of the Worlds. So I got through the last episode last night. For those who may be watching it, it's on SBS on demand at the moment. And the funny thing that I've picked up about this movie, it is totally got the wrong name. It's got nothing to do with any variation of the War of the Worlds that we've ever seen throughout history. They could have renamed the show to something completely different. But having said that, though, I think it's actually quite good. They've done a lot of good stuff with it. They are doing a third season, which is due out next year. And if you like your sci-fi a little bit like left of center, it's certainly worth a go, providing you don't mind reading a few subtitles along the way as well, because there's a fair bit of that going on. I assume you haven't seen any of it, dude?
I think I saw the first season. I haven't got to the second season yet, but I did enjoy that. It was quite good.
Yeah, luckily it's only 8 episodes, so that makes it nice and easy, and there's no mucking around there as well. Very, very cool. Any other comments there? Good stuff. All right, so that's about it for the week. So as you can see, there's always something coming out. I know, like yesterday the 2 trailers came out for Batman and The Flash and all that. It's like 2 different Batmans in 2 different movies come out at the same time with the trailers do. So how freaking stupid is that? But we move on. So, because otherwise we could be discussing that for hours to come. So, all right, we're going to have a bit of a natter tonight. And what we're discussing is about it's cool to be a modern fan. And I've got to thank Gavin for letting me use this particular photo for the Mercury Cosplay Theatre Group in New South Wales. And right now he'd be going, yay, team, because that's part of the crowd that he hangs out with. What I wanted to bring up, and it's actually handy that MPS is with us because he's actually the president of Austrek at the moment, is that yes, William, I did actually enjoy it. Yes, it was very, very cool. And obviously because of the fact that they don't use like aliens, it's like your 3-legged aliens, it must have been amazingly cheap to make. But so the key thing is about science fiction fans and fandom and being a part of it and how the world has changed over the decades. Now, it might be impossible for people out there to fathom this, but there was actually a time where fans didn't tell people what they liked. They kept it quiet. They didn't tell their workmates, I did this, right? They, because it had a social, being a fan, a science fiction fan, had a social stigma associated with it and did for decades. It wasn't like something that just happened overnight. And you could say, yes, I'm a Star Trek fan and I'm a Star Wars fan and all that, but whether you would broadcast it to people in the outside world by and large, a lot of people didn't do it. And whereas today, it's the exact opposite. Now people just go to town. They go, look at me, I'm a fan. I'm wearing my shirts and I've got my jackets and I'm going completely, got my tattoos and I'm good to go. So, and I just wanted to, now I don't know how many people reading this or watching this show now would have experienced that. And I know you sort of came in, as in dude, you sort of came into it just at the cusp where the world was changing, where announcing the fact that you're a fan wasn't a bad thing. But even in your younger experiences, did you ever come across something where you thought, you know what, I'm just not going to tell anybody?
Yeah, I did. There was a couple of those instances. The first one I think was about early 80s. Must have been after Empire came out. So I was a little bitty in primary school, and a couple of guys had the large 12-inch figures, Boba Fett, and I think an IG-88 at the time, and it was like they were really cool and everything, and you just sort of got bagged for it, and it was like, hang on a second, but you got the figures and you're telling me it's so I didn't understand that at the time. The other time that sort of happened was back in year 10 for me. So 1988, we had a communication project, and sorry, 1989, because I based it all on the Batman film. And at the time there was so much information you could just rip out from the newspaper and from magazines and TV Week and all that sort of stuff, and you had all this stuff to go by. And I did this as a verbal project, and I tell you what, the bagging I got for that afterwards was just horrendous. And from then on in, I never said a word about what I liked. Even though I would go home and watch Battle of the Planets on TV and Inspector Gadget and watch all the Star Wars stuff and Batman stuff, you just never mentioned it to anyone. So that was still the late 80s, early 90s, and it wasn't until much later that it sort of got introduced as a mainstream sort of thing, like you said. And I'd probably even say to the point where I think maybe even 10 years ago I would have only just started mentioning it to more people rather than just the group of friends that we have that's in this area.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And Christy has said that she did. So I'm working on the assumption that she's saying that she was a fan but didn't tell anybody. Now, if you go back through history, and I have read a bit of history about science fiction fandom, where it started kind of around in the 1920s, and how it sort of was created primarily in America, and there was like branches of it out here and all the rest of it. But we were talking about handfuls of people. Like you would have they called them conferences back then, and 6 people would turn up, and that was considered a big deal because people were scattered everywhere. Now, to be fair, it was hard to communicate with other people and sort of mix in with other people. But by and large, I saw firsthand plenty of experiences where it wasn't just a case of saying, well, I'm a fan, I don't really want to talk about it to the outside world, but also how society perceived science fiction fandom and how the media perceived it as well. And there was all these examples that I came across, and I thought, yeah, you know what? If anything, the media was against it because they found it something that they could hang shit on, that they could laugh at. And because by and large, fandom had a stigma associated with it, right? It was your dorky, overweight, and they never leave the house kind of people. And to be fair, there are individuals like that, but that was categorizing everybody into this one big bucket. And you go, well, hang on, that's not necessarily true at all. And I saw, and I can actually mention a couple of the classic examples that come up when you go, you know what? If the media turns against fandom and fans, then clearly society will probably follow suit. And that's exactly what happened. So did you ever experience, I mean, I've got a couple of examples I'm going to bring up, but excuse me, did you ever experience anything like that?
Well, in terms of the media, the one that really upset me the most was probably one that came across, I think it was on Channel 10, about, it must have been Supernova, probably 10 years ago, where what I'd seen from the day was families dressed in costume, having a ball, didn't matter what they looked like. No one cared about the quality of the costume. It was just everyone was having fun. And the news reported that, and I quote, the freaks and geeks out. And it wasn't so much the geeks part, it was the freaks part. Because when you look at fandom, they just think this is fandom. You're a nerd, you watch sci-fi, you watch superhero films, all that sort of stuff. But what they forget is fandom is everywhere. So football fans who do far worse than us, soccer fans who just tear down stadiums if their team loses. Like, they're the negatives in that area, and yet we are. I'm not going to wholesome comes to mind, and that's sort of more to what I'm sort of going to. It's a family fun and family environment. No one walks up to another fan and says, your costumes are rubbish, and beats the crap out of him. That's not the case. The case is they look at each other and they go, oh, that's really cool, and I should do that next time, and maybe I want to do this, and you look awesome, and can I get a photo? It's all about bringing in the community, whereas every other fandom around that has a major number to, football and that sort of thing, seems to have a large negative aspect to it.
It's very interesting. So Williams made a point here of saying that he told work colleagues in '85 that he was a Doctor Who fan, and actually found some friends who were in the same boat as well. It's kind of funny because I think you probably find in a lot of cases people didn't tell their work colleagues, because generally, and this isn't the case now, but it was the case. And as I said, I saw all this firsthand, so I know what I'm talking about, that fans were usually considered as social outcasts. Okay, so you've effectively got your science fiction fans on this side and what we used to call the mundanes on that side. So fans, funnily enough, from all throughout the 80s and even some of the 90s, from what I saw, they didn't like AFL football. They didn't smoke. They weren't yobbos. They were responsible citizens, and by and large, they all loved cats. I don't know what the connection was there. I mean, there was even once an award at a convention for the best fanish cat. But the key thing is that everybody was welcome into the fan community without prejudice, regardless of who you were, what you looked like, where you came from, all this sort of thing. And maybe people sort of saw that as being, oh, well, if it's all the social outcasts being in this particular organization, therefore they're all on the lower end of the social scale, as it were, even though it's a completely incorrect assessment of it. But that's how I sort of saw it. And using one example that came up that I was mentioned to me a few years ago, there was a girl that I know, Jessica. She actually said she used to be bullied in high school because she was a science fiction fan, into comics and all sort of business, right? And then, of course, all the pop culture expos come along. And so she goes, she's part of that because her father's into it and all the rest of it. And she actually saw the bullies at the event, right? And it's just like, what the hell are you guys doing here? You used to hang shit on me for being a fan, and yet you're here yourself celebrating what I celebrated. And it's like, talk about how the whole thing had just gone completely arse about over one period in time, which wasn't that long ago, to another period in time. Absolutely insane. So what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think a lot of it may stem back to either a group sort of peer pressure where, 2 or 3 people you sort of at school sort of thing, and you mention something, they will gang up on you, yet they all secretly love it, but they don't say anything. So again, potentially they're fans the same as yourself. If you look at films like Revenge of the Nerds, they're still seen as the smart, geeky sort of characters, and yet the jocks are all the ones that are meant to be the cool guys, and eventually it all turns around on top of them. And I think to an extent we may be seeing something now. So if you look at all the potential nerds and geeks that we know who work in IT or any sort of branch of science or something of a high level of education, and you look at some of these other people that have picked on you over the past, and you look and maybe make a comparison to see what they've done. Maybe the nerds have turned the world around. We've become potentially smarter, and therefore created a little bit more of an upstream sort of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's very interesting. In The Big Bang Theory, there was an episode, one of the really early episodes, actually, where Leonard says to Sheldon that we are, as in the geeks / nerds, are now the alpha males because of the intellectual side of things. And I thought that was a very interesting way of looking at it. Now, of course, not everybody's going to necessarily agree with that, but it was the fact that it was even brought up in the first place was actually quite interesting. So where are we? So Joshua here said, it's funny mousing your passion. It's amazing how else sometimes opens up. Well, yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, prior to the internet coming into play, there were people you would say, well, okay, I'm a fan, but I'm not telling anybody, especially if you work. But on the other side of the office, there could be someone who's a fan, and of course, they don't tell anybody either. And in what used to give it away, I would argue, the first signs of people starting to connect were phone rings, because you could customize your phone ring. And I know you've experienced this, and I certainly have, where you'd be in the office and suddenly the Doctor Who theme would just come up as a phone ring. And you go, shit, whose phone's that? I never expected that, or the Imperial March or something from Star Wars. And you go, who knew? I thought I was the only one. And maybe that was the start of the new modern version of people sort of connecting, saying, did you like this? Yeah, I like that too. And it's all sort of spread from there. Now, with that in mind, there's a couple of really long messages here. Thomas has said he never experienced the fandom thing so much as a kid as a natural outsider. I was resident telling me, well, actually, it's a very good point, Thomas, because if you're on your own and you're not a part of the community at all, yeah, you are right. You would keep it pretty quiet because you're thinking, well, I really like, as you said in this your message, Dungeons and Dragons, but all the kids around me, they're not into that stuff at all. So I'm just going to hide it and keep it all sort of on the QT. So, but when you end up becoming a part of a community, then suddenly it's like, oh, actually, I can talk about this now. You know, we may be shunned by the outside world, but at least within this core group, where like, you know, hiding in the back dark room somewhere, that it's all good. And I finally found my family, and I know personally that's how it worked for me. So, what do you reckon, dude? Do you reckon that's sort of how? Say in your case, does it work for you? Where you suddenly, I'm on my own, like you said earlier, and then you suddenly find a group, and it's like, oh, here we go, we're good to rock and roll.
Yeah, like that. So back in the year 2000, I basically had no people that I knew from school days. So none of my anyone, no friends, nothing like that. So I essentially had no contact with any of them. An opportunity come up through a guy I used to work with who knew another guy who actually introduced me to DAGs. So from then on in, working on that one film introduced me to everyone I pretty much know now in terms of fandom. I have other groups that I've got friends in, but they're again from that time period. So it's almost like a clean cut. And from the year 2000, everyone I know now is all in my immediate past and future. And everyone I've ever known, friends, bullies, whatever the case is, all gone. So it's really interesting. The groups I'm in now are so welcoming that there's a point where I go, why didn't I come to these groups earlier? Why didn't I know about them earlier? You know, back in the 80s, back in the 90s, sort of thing. And, you know, would they have been as welcoming back then?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So things have changed so much in 20 years. It's just kind of crazy. The governor said a couple of back in Newcastle, back in the 80s, people wore their Star Trek uniforms under their work clothes. That sounds like secret men's business when you say it like that. But yeah, a lot of people kept it very. I got such a funny story to talk about regarding Star Trek. But I'm just going to read some other comments here before we get to that. So most of the kids liked Star Wars at primary school and high school, but wasn't an issue. See, for me, it was the opposite. Right. So I was in primary school when Star Wars first came out in 1977. And it was a small primary school. It was the greatest thing ever. Right. As soon as I moved to high school 2 years later, it's like nobody wanted to know me. Right. It was like, oh, no, we're too old for Star Wars. That's a kid's thing, you know, even though we're only like freaking 13, 14 years old, even maybe younger than that. And I remember that was like, oh, shit, okay, I really don't like talking about it. Year 7, year 8, year 9, don't say anything to anybody. Keep it all quiet. Maybe a couple of friends here and there. As the years rolled on, my attitude changed. And I didn't mind writing Star Wars stuff on my school bag and all the rest of it. But for those early years, it was a complete contrast between one and the other, even though we're only talking like the end of one school year, the start of a following school year. It was like 5 months or 3 months, not even that. And it was like the mindset had changed completely. And I found that really quite surprising. There was a comment here. Christy mentioned about bullying Poppy in school because she read X-Men until a former student came to visit and was a Marvel illustrator. Yeah, it's an interesting scenario because if you're advertising you're a fan amongst other people and they clearly don't like it, even if they do like it but don't want to admit that they like it, and I reckon that is the case with a lot of people. So, for example, a good example that I would use is that you have a costume party, right? And we're talking about just a party, not like an event or whatever. And you get people all get dressed up in costume. Of course, you get to say, beauty, I'll wear my Star Wars or Star Trek costume or whatever else. And you know that everybody else around you is loving being dressed up, even if you get your what do you call it, the dudes high on testosterone wearing, I'm going to come as Rambo and I'm going to come as the Terminator, whatever. Deep down, they're loving it, right? They're absolutely loving it. But outside of the party, they go, no, I can't wear this anywhere else because I'm going to feel ashamed. I'm going to feel like a dork. And it's not the case at all. But that's how it was back then. And I'll just share one story with you. And I couldn't believe it when I saw this. So this is where the media came into play. There was a convention in interstate. I think it was Sydney. I can't remember. It was in the 1990s or whatever else. And of course, the media were notorious for picking out people and having a go at them, right? And whether it be like, we'll pick on the dorkiest fan there and we'll just focus on him, or do something in the editing. And what happened in this, and I saw this myself, and I couldn't believe it, right? So they're interviewing various people, and one of the guys that they interviewed said, "We're just like, as you would say, as I would say, we're just normal people. We're not freaks, right?" And they took the snippet of "We're not freaks," and they just showed people, "We're not freaks. We're not freaks. We're not freaks. We're not." And it's like, you freaking bastards! Absolutely pricky. What a pricky thing to do. And that's how they finished the segment. And I remember speaking to a reporter in 1993 at Starfest, and I said, as fans, we don't like talking to you people because you guys hang shit on us. And the reporter even said, it's not us, it's the editors and the producers who make you guys look bad, right? We ourselves love it. But once we've done the material and we give it to the editors and the producers, they're the ones who then go, no, we're going to make these people look stupid. And that's exactly what happened. So I'll tell you what, that was heartbreaking seeing that sequence. But anyway, there you go. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it's funny. They don't sort of do that to football people, or football fans who are as extreme as we would be in terms of fandom, and they don't even do that with any other fandom that I can think of, So it really is up to the media to turn the audience onto or off of a group or a topic or something like that, and there are, I don't know, countless incidents in terms of fandom, but in terms of sport, it's all about how good we are as a country in terms of sport and how this and how that, and everyone's a sports fan. I couldn't give a rat's about sports, to be honest with you. It doesn't really interest me. I'd rather play it than watch it, and yet many people are more happy to watch it than do it. So, and complain about it when their team loses and they have no control over it whatsoever.
Yeah, we got to remember too that sport is a more socially acceptable pastime. You got to allow for that, right? So two things I want to bring up here. So Gavin has said, typical media scum, throw them to the rancor. Actually, the media now are completely on a different foot to how they once were, right? And that's even like at your Supernovas and Oz Comic Cons, the news actually turn up to do segments on these shows. Every year they seem to be there. So they've obviously acknowledged, okay, they're going to toe the line and actually show how good it is rather than hang shit on it, because people just aren't going to go for that anymore. So the media now have changed completely. And to be fair, it wasn't always the case, right? There was a segment from the 1986, what do you call it? Austrek, the Star Trek fan club, their Christmas party. And it was a really, really hot day. And Day by Day turned up, the current affairs show, and the segment that they did on that was very complimentary towards fans. So yeah, it's not all media; it was just some. George has got a good one. He was lucky into Planet of the Apes, and so were some of his mates. I think, depending on what you're a fan of, may have been how it was perceived by other people. And yeah, Planet of the Apes seemed to just slide in under the radar. But I would argue that had it been, because it was in the 1970s, if you said, I'm going to wear a Planet of the Apes costume down to the local shops or something like that, or it may have been looked upon as like frowned upon, not frowned upon, but looked upon as being a bit silly. But there are certainly some franchises that I think have a bit more respect than others. And I think for the most part, Planet of the Apes was actually pretty good. Clearly, Star Trek and Doctor Who copped it pretty bad, even though it was mainly from short-sighted critics who didn't realize just how good the whole community was. But it's all comes down to first impressions, and that's the key thing. So if you say, well, I'm a jock, as it were, and I meet a fan, their first impression of how they meet that person will determine their future thoughts. And of course, hopefully, they'll take it all at face value and won't just put up a wall and go, do the old Grease thing. It's like, no, it's all bullshit. Whereas in the back of their minds, they're going, we're loving it. So hopefully it's nothing like that. But yeah, so you're kind of lucky, George, that, Planet of the Apes actually wasn't so bad after all. What do you reckon, dude?
I'm just wondering if that's just due to the era in that sort of sense. So obviously, when Star Wars came out, it was a big deal. When Planet of the Apes came out in the late 60s and 70s, there really wasn't any other sort of sci-fi around. There was 2001: Space Odyssey and that sort of thing. Not that you can really do or dress up to that as much as you can Planet of the Apes. Maybe it was the sense that until Star Wars came along, sci-fi had its own sort of subsection community, and it was okay and it plodded along by itself. No one got interested in it. No one wanted to talk about it outside of the groups themselves. And then Star Wars comes along and just opens up to everything. It's the biggest sci-fi film at the time. 4 years, there's people lining up. I remember seeing reports. I've seen Star Wars 62 times in the cinemas. I've seen it 85 times, that sort of thing. And you go, this is insane, and maybe it all sort of started changing in the late 70s from that. Superman came along, and then the Empire, and Flash Gordon, which probably didn't have the same sort of recognition as Star Wars did. But you got all these things that are now becoming bigger and more colourful, and with special effects kicking in and making it more fantasy than just watching the old, like the old Flash Gordons where they fly around in the ship and they land, and that's the same footage as they go back up around. This was new and exciting and colourful and really out there. And so fans wanted a piece of this. We've heard many stories of people watching Star Wars in the theatre, and that opening sequence where the Star Destroyer comes across on top, and everyone's in awe. You didn't get that in anything else. So maybe it was that sign of the times where people just got more excited because there was more to it. It was action based, and I don't know.
So Susan mentioned about the sport reference that you brought up, and you can look. Sport is such a big entity worldwide that you can, it doesn't fit into the same category. I mean, to be fair, science fiction fans aren't the only ones who copped it on the rough end of the stick. So if you're a fan of model railroads, for example, or you're into model boats, I've seen on the media where some of those people, mainly guys, have sort of had a little bit of criticism, smart ass comments sort of chucked in their direction. So it's not just science fiction fans. And of course, a lot of it, and I agree with like with Christy here, is that it's all about ignorance. And there are people publicly would say, oh yeah, you science fiction fans are all a bunch of dorks that don't want to be a part of it. But then they suddenly realize, oh, hang on, these people, as in the fans, have all these friends, got all these contacts, they've got this great social network that's going for them, and I don't mean like an online network, I mean an actual real one. And there would be probably an element of envy and jealousy there. And I actually saw in the documentary, The Fandom Menace, not Phantom, but Fandom Menace, the lady there, Karen, who was a big Star Wars collector, and she actually mentioned that one of her friends said, I wish I had a hobby like yours, because it just opened up this entire community of people. And a lot of people, I think, would argue and say, well, I don't want to be part of all the dorks, but hey, I'm really missing out at the same time. And not every science fiction fan is going to be a part of the community. They're going to just stay hidden away. And that's the reason why in the internet age, a lot of fans have, what, I won't go to fan club meetings and I won't go to conventions. I might go to supernovas or whatever, but they just want to stay hidden in the background, and that's very, very unfortunate, because you can only get so much out of words on a screen. But yeah, and just quickly before I get back to you, so the difference is, George, that they were your friends, and they would not have picked on you because they were your friends. It's the outside world, how they would have seen you. So if you're walking down the street, say you go, and I've seen this happen even today, you go to the footy wearing a Planet of the Apes shirt, or the cricket wearing the Planet of the Apes shirt, would people then look at you and go, mate, you look like a freaking tool wearing that? Whereas I know for a fact people today will wear science fiction shirts at just about every sporting event around. And I've seen plenty of examples of that. So maybe the world is different in that regard. So, yeah. There's a couple of things I've got to read here. So you're right. And I think it is jealousy has a lot to do with it as well. And this is where I get back to that message earlier about the girl who was bullied at school for being a fan, and then her bullies actually turn up to science fiction, pop culture events. And yeah, it is pure jealousy. So it's the stigma of how the outside world see you and how the media portray you, but deep down they're all probably thinking, shit, that, wish I could be a part of that. So sorry, dude, you're going to say something?
I wasn't, but I'm going to change my thought to that. I think that could be it. The jealousy factor is there. Imagine someone sitting there going, look at the people who are getting to dress up, and I would love this. I watch this character, I love this person in the show, and I would love to dress up. But for whatever reason, they're afraid or unsure or seeing, over the years how they've been treated with other things. Now you see all these people dressing up, and you can disappear into a con like Supernova or OCC or whatever, and literally not even be noticed by anyone. It looks weird now if you rock up in just casual clothes. If you're not in costume or wearing a shirt or a item of some sort of fandom, you look like the weird one out of place. And it's kind of strange how 15 years ago, when they all sort of kicked off big time here, it was completely the opposite. Few people dressed up, only the more hardcore fans dressed in costumes. And it's just, even that's sort of switched around a little bit.
Yep, totally agree with you. And you are right, Gavin, that everything's changed on its head. And I think the pop culture expos have a lot to do with it, as you just mentioned, MPS, because they are such big events. It's almost like a weight of numbers, right, against society. So if you get society versus 10 fans, they can hang shit on them big time. But if it's 10,000 or 30,000, they've got no alternative but to capitulate and go, you know what, we'll just stay quiet. Maybe not. It's not so bad after all. And of course, somebody somewhere will say, well, I reckon they're all a bunch of dogs, but their mate may go, I'm off to the Supernova Oz Comic Con. Think it sounds grouse. I'm going to go and see this thing or meet this author or this artist or buy some collectibles or whatever. So the mindset isn't the same anymore, which of course then prompts the question, if the pop culture expos did not exist, would everything still be the way it was? So it primarily kicked off here with Armageddon in 2007, right? There were a couple of test ones before that, but Armageddon 2007 was the big one. From there, Supernova finally came in, OCC came in, I think, 2012, and here we are today. So you do wonder, if they never existed, they never came here at all, and we're talking about Australia-wide, not just in Melbourne, whether things would still be the same. Would it be the bad old days still being around? Because now, you're right, you can wear anything anywhere practically, and nobody bats an eyelid. And I knew the world had changed when a few years ago I was in Bendigo, and a dude is walking down the street and he's got an Ewok shirt on, right? Right. And I thought, I would never have expected to see that in my lifetime. A guy is wearing an Ewok shirt from Return of the Jedi in Bendigo. He's just walking down the street. I said, that would never happen in my day. You'd almost be ashamed to do that. You'd be, not because of it's an Ewok thing, but because it's, one, a guy, and there's a bloke. Two, it's a Star Wars thing. Then it's an Ewok thing, and he's in public. It's like, that would never have happened in my time. And it's just, that was when I knew, the world had changed. And you're right, no one batted an eyelid. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting because remember when we did 80 and we had our photos in the booklet for that. So for those who don't know, we did a con called Con 80, which was all 80s sci-fi. And in the booklet for the con, there was photos of us from the 80s. And there was one of me with my Return of the Jedi t-shirt on, and it had a biker scout on it, brown sleeves, white shirt, biker scout. And I was at school camp, and I don't remember that after the camp. So if someone was loving it, didn't like me, or whatever the case was, my shirt never came home with me. So maybe the jealousy was there, and someone wanted something that was classed as cool back then to some, but not cool if you wore it out in public.
I like this comment from Gavin. He said, until cosplay and fandom dressing up was mostly at Halloween, there was costuming in the fandom community. And I remember going to science fiction conventions in the 80s, walking in the street, got me caught. I mean, it could have been it was a piece of shit, really. But, walking down the street, look at me, look at me, look at me. And back then, people look at me thinking, what a freaking dog. In fact, my most embarrassing moment of my entire life occurred walking to a convention one day and walking down the street. I would have been 86, 19, right? And I had a black cloak on. I go, look at me, look at me, look at me. And a gust of wind, and the whole thing just blew over my head. And I couldn't see anything. It was black. And I go, what the hell's going on? And of course, once I got it off my head, everybody's just looking at me. I thought, oh my God, I felt like this big. So trying to be Mr. Cool, and it completely backfired. But you are right, though, as was mentioned earlier. Now you can wear costumes just about anywhere, regardless of the quality or the style or anything. And especially when there's an event on. And if anything, when there's an Oz Comic Con or a Supernova, people looking at the tramp stop and go, oh, all those people are clearly going to a pop culture expo. No one's looking at them going, well, those pack of freaking idiots. So it's a completely different mindset. And I do think it was mentioned earlier that the internet may have been a part of it, but I think it's actually the pop culture expos that has just brought everybody out of the woodwork. So it's amazing how that's.
I think there's three things that bring it all together. I think Big Bang Theory started it. I think the fact that the Marvel movies have been so good, and they're seen as mainstream films, not sci-fi as such, and the pop culture expos. I think the three of those things over the last 10 years or so. When was the first Iron Man? Was it 2007, 2008?
10. First one was 10 or 09 or 10 or something.
So having those three things, where in the MCU, the heroes aren't always in costume. Tony Stark is driving the latest car and he's doing this and he's doing that, and occasionally he chucks on a costume. But it's not in your face Superman, Batman, Spider-Man sort of how to do it. And how many people have you seen at expos who aren't dressed, in a cape and a mask and whatever the case is. They've done those lower level sort of characters. A friend of ours, Mike, who's bald, had a black suit on one day, had a red tie, and everyone thought he was. I'm trying to think of the guy now. It was a comic book, and basically he was an assassin, and he was just dressed to MC something, and they all thought he was dressed as one of the assassins in this particular series, and it was really kind of good to sort of see that you don't have to wear a cape or a mask to actually have a costume in sci-fi anymore.
Speaking of red and black stuff, the Vile, he did tell me this story. He went as Darth Maul in '99 to a football match, and Essendon is his team, so they're black and red, so he can kind of get away with it. But his father was embarrassed, and you know what? I kind of get that. So it's well done for you, Mr. Vile, for that. Now, there's a good comment here. So George said it was harder being a wog because he's obviously from Italian descent. Back then, it became a badge of honor. And to a large degree, it's actually they both mirror each other because you are right. I mean, people of European descent, especially through the 50s, 60s, and the 70s, were stigmatized a little bit, and then they integrated into society and everybody just accepted it. It's like it's no big deal now. And I guess to a large degree, fandom is very, very similar to in a lot of ways where, the difference was obviously if you're a fan, you just don't tell anybody. Whereas if you're an Italian or a Greek person, you can't just hide that. But I think there's probably a lot, some similarities between the two. The thing was with fans, when did they feel comfortable telling people who they were and what they liked? Now, there was a comment here. I have to go back, so you have to bear with me for a second. So Thomas has said about sci-fi and horror in the 50s and the 60s. Everything changed, Thomas, in the 70s because science fiction changed in the 1970s. So prior to the mid-70s, and I have to use Star Wars as an example, even Close Encounters of the Third Kind, science fiction movies and TV shows weren't mainstream. A lot of people didn't watch them, with mainly the fan base, okay? And movies in particular were very, very depressing because it was during the Vietnam War and it was all during the Cold War, and everybody was depressed about nuclear bombs going off and all the rest of it. Once Star Wars came out, and then the movie studios realized, oh, hang on, there's actually a market for this stuff. There's actually a big fan base for it. The world changed. They produced more material, and suddenly everybody felt like, oh, being sci-fi fan is not a bad thing. So that was where it all sort of changed. So you are right. Prior to the mid-70s, if you said, oh, I'm a science fiction fan, like George was saying about Planet of the Apes earlier, some people go, mate, you're a freaking dork. So whereas now, as was someone's mentioned earlier, about the fact that there's stuff being produced everywhere today, it's awesome. And if anything, we aren't necessarily the minority anymore. We're not necessarily the majority, but we don't have to stay hidden as we once did. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. And for those people who didn't experience that in the past, you just don't know how lucky you are, because now, being a fan is a really groovy thing. What do you reckon, dude? I've got to look at some of the messages.
It's interesting to see. We did this test when Dags and I, a couple of the other guys were over in Disneyland a couple of years ago, where we said, Disneyland was owned Star Wars, and we said, see if we can find a Star Trek shirt amongst these people. And we didn't found one, and that was right at the last minute sort of thing. But if you, as the normal sort of person, walk through, say, the supermarket, do your grocery shopping, see how many people are wearing pop culture referenced shirts, and over the years, kids have worn stuff. How many kids I see heaps of kids wearing their costumes half asked or full asked or whatever the case is, because mum's dragged them out of the house and they're wearing, Spider-Man or, whatever costume. So start counting how many of those sort of people you see, and you'll start seeing that the numbers have come up. And I think that is partly because the likes of, say, Kmart and Big W are now printing these shirts out. They're not a specialized shirt anymore. You can pick them up for $10. You can pick up all sorts of whatever fandom you're into nowadays. So it's cheap and accessible.
Yeah, once companies realize, oh, hang on, there's actually a market for producing merchandise that people are going to buy, then they suddenly realize, hang on, they're not so bad after all. Now, there's a couple of things I really want to point out here that have come through from people. Excuse me. Hang on. I've got to go through bang, bang, bang. Give me a second. I've just got to find, there's a couple here that are really, really relevant. So Anders, like, sort of joined us a bit late. Jealousy, as we said, could be a thing, and she doesn't attend functions. It's mainly all the money issue. Well, that's the thing. I mean, science fiction fans actually do have a lot of money, especially now that we're an older generation. That's a cool thing. I agree, Ange. The quality of the material has just gone like skyrocketed. If you look at anything, as we were saying, from the 70s backwards, there was not a lot of necessarily quality or entertainment. Now it's everything. And I think that has a lot to do with it. Now, there's a classic here. Bang, bang. Sorry, I've just got to read this. Okay, so Gavin, don't class yourself as a dork, because that is a derogatory term. You can say you're a geek, which I don't like. But if you want to say you're a nerd, be proud of being a nerd. But don't say you're a dork. You're actually putting yourself down there. Okay, so I myself hate being called a geek. I do find that derogatory, because that to me is the kind of person who looks at computers with the big glasses and with the Band-Aid in the middle. But I'm a self-confessed nerd, and I'm proud of that. So, but don't ever call yourself a dork. So, okay, so there's a bit of advice for you.
The funny thing about that, Gavin, is you can usually be the biggest nerd in the room. I've done that many, many times with people I've worked with, and they say something, I go, I bet you I can out-nerd you, and I usually do, and I don't have the greatest knowledge, up to date like Bags. My knowledge is probably a third of what his is, but I can still be the biggest nerd in the room, and you know what? It's a fun thing to be sometimes.
Good stuff. Glenn's joined us from YouTube. Good on you, Glenn. Good to see you there. And we are Georges. We know MPS is sorry, I got the dude. We do know MPS is going through some audio issues, but because we're live, we don't want to disconnect him and reconnect him. So unfortunately, we're just going to have to sort of tolerate it from now. And we've actually got someone from Pakistan, Sonny from Pakistan. So I don't know if Sonny's a Sci-Fi fan or what the experience is like over in Pakistan, but good on you for him. So nerdism rocks. I mentioned dork as a derogatory term. Okay, I will never use it as a complimentary term. Right, I'll never call my friends dorks. But it's the way at the time society perceived science fiction fans. And to be fair, there has been occasions, and there are individuals, and you can sometimes turn up to a fan club meeting, and there will be more dorks than you would prefer, and that sort of is a bit of a turn-off moment. But that's more the exception than the rule. But so, I was never using the word dork as a complimentary term. So I kept that in mind, kids, which is very, very groovy. And there was something else I wanted to say. Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story. So this is something that happened to me. So in my previous working life, actually, Gavin, I'm completely with you on that one. I hate being called a freak, right? I find that very derogatory. It's worse than dork. So if someone has said to me I'm a science fiction freak or a sci-fi freak, I actually take offense to that, because a freak is an abomination of nature. Okay, and that's actually, but most people aren't aware of the term. They just use it as a compliment, but it is not a compliment. So if anybody ever calls you a freak, that's if anybody watching this now say you're a sci-fi freak, I wouldn't take offense to that and say, no, I'm an enthusiast, I'm a fan, I'm a nerd, but I'm not a freak and I'm not a dork. So there you go. So the story I got to share. So in my previous working life, I was a security officer at Toyota, and I hid my fan interests. I didn't tell anybody, right? I kept it very, very quiet, because in that industry, we're talking about the late 80s, the early 90s, it was a blokes thing, right? It's a blokes thing, You got to be a bloke, you got to like footy, you got to like the chicks. That's it, right? It was a guys club. And I thought, if anybody learns that I'm a Star Wars fan and into Star Trek and shit, mate, I'm going to just get bullied to the max, right? Because back then it was a different world. Somewhere along the way, a security guard learned that I was a Star Trek fan, or I like Star Trek. And I remember this is an amazing story. He comes up to me in this office, and there's all these security guards around me. He walks up to me and he says, I heard you like Star Trek. And I thought, shit, what do I do? Because I've been a member of Austrek for 10 years at this point, and the Star Trek Club. And I thought, you know what? Oh, yeah, I don't mind it. It's all right. It's okay. He says, oh, dude, there's this great new show coming out called Voyager, right? It's got a female captain, and it's in the Delta Quadrant, and it's freaking awesome. Because we're talking, this is pre-internet, obviously. And he's giving me this entire spiel, right? And I'm just going, oh, yeah, whatever. Because there's all these people in the room with me. And I didn't have the heart to tell him. I'd already seen the first 6 episodes. But I thought, I'll just have to play dumb. I can't say, dude, high five, you're a fellow nerd. I was not willing to do that. And it was only when I transferred out of the security department into the IT department of Toyota, I thought, now I can tell the world who I am and what my interests are. And as it turned out, my managers, my co-workers, they all jumped on board, to the point where when The Force Awakens came out in 2015, it took me 30 minutes to walk from the car park to my desk, because every person along the way, what did you think of the movie? What did you think of the movie? What did you think of the movie? So it was just a completely different mindset from the late 80s, early 90s, right through to the mid 2000s, and the people that I was with. So, yeah. there's my story. So there you go.
Yeah, it's funny because in the last laboratory I worked in, I had a boss who was looking into it. He was more into games and consoles and that sort of thing. And then I had another supervisor who was out in the country, and he would ring up and we would talk about stuff, and then he'd say, "So what do you think about the latest this and that and whatever?" And we would spend more time talking about that than work, which was nice. So occasionally that happens, and then other people you just sort of you bypass that whole section of your life because you know you're just not going to get anything out of it.
So knowledge freak, no, I still wouldn't use it. I still find that term derogatory. As I said, you know what freak actually really means. I just say you're just a nerd, really. I don't know, but I wouldn't use the word freak. So freaking dorky, dad, got to get out of that habit, kids. Vile has called me a dag. Absolutely, I am, and I'm proud of it. So there you go. With that in mind, Sonny, suddenly, you want to be my best friend, you're going to have to take a number and wait in the queue, dude, because I've got a whole stack of dudes in front of you who, yes, exactly right. And yes, so that's sort of where it's all at. It's interesting, isn't it? And we're in a time now where it's all open for everybody. The world is welcoming. People are coming in. I do agree the internet has helped to a large degree. Social media has. The pop culture expos have done wonders. The world is a different place now. And using the example of the media earlier, we're not shying away from the cameras as we once did. I remember I was at the Star Wars 10th anniversary banquet in 1987. The TV station turned up, and the guy who was running the event actually said to the media, "We don't want you here, right? If you can film your stuff, but don't interfere with the show," because they have a tendency of doing that. And the footage that they showed on TV was good, but it was nothing spectacular. And it took a lot of years for the world to change. And once, I guess, you had the weight of numbers to say, oh, hang on, this fandom thing with science fiction people isn't like 20 or 30, dudes crowded in a room. There's like tens of thousands of them. People, I think, stood up and took notice. And that was globally as well. And I know the show Trekkies, especially Trekkies 2, the documentary, refers to people in Europe, in like some of the Scandinavian countries and Romania and places like that, who said it was because of like science fiction shows that kept them going through their communist regimes and all the rest of it. So, there's more to it than what meets the eye. And I think a lot of people just never even realized that at the time. So, and so Glenn said, yeah, something like that when he worked at Ford. Now, you were saying earlier about T-shirts and that. So I have seen, with my own eyes, I've seen people wear science fiction T-shirts, not just little kids, males, grown men and women, at the Grand Prix, at the cricket. I've seen them wearing Star Trek shirts on cruise ships when you used to be able to go cruising. One of the most amazing things I ever saw was a footy match in Alice Springs where an Indigenous Australian was wearing a Star Wars shirt. I saw him on TV. I go, what are the chances of that? And it's everywhere now. And I think it's amazing when someone says, I'm off to this particular event. What will I wear? I know I'll put on a Star Wars shirt or a Star Trek shirt and be proud of who I am and what I love. And that's an amazing change from what it was like back in the dark past. So there you go. What do you reckon, dude?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just thinking when you were talking about that, I'd be interested to see, and maybe Daniel or maybe the Vile could tell me this, numbers on a Facebook football group. I'm part of one of the He-Man and Master of the Universe Facebook pages. There's many of them. I think I've got about 5 of them on my Facebook feed. One of them the other day just clocked up 10,000 members on this page. And that was just one page, and the page has only been going for a few years. I've got to think that in terms of social media, the numbers of people are now getting phenomenal. I think the last stat I heard was 1 million people join Facebook every day. So when you look at those sort of numbers, in this country, at least, you would have to have, your Essendons and your Carltons having 100,000 people on the Facebook page just to know what's going on with it, even if they're not members necessarily in the sense of having a membership, per year.
Yeah, the problem I find with social media, it's still people sitting behind screens, right? It's not people interacting with other people, right? And that's what I was referring to earlier, where fans came out of the woodwork and they found, we've got the internet, we've got social media. I can now broadcast how much of a fan I am, but I don't want to meet other people in the street. I don't want to be seen out in the open wearing my Star Wars cap or my Star Trek cap. And so that to me doesn't kind of cut the mustard. It's only when they come out of the shadows and actually mix with other people and say, I'm proud to be this, and they sort of show it off. But I know what you mean. I mean, the whole social media revolution's gone nuts. We're almost about to finish, but you are right, Joe. Harry Potter really has changed things around. A lot of people really got into it. And now it's as popular as all hell. You do wonder, had Harry Potter and the movies existed 20, 30 years ago, would it have been the same? And there's one story I've really got to share. It's a shame he didn't turn up tonight. Aaron Challenger, who's a friend of ours who runs his own collectible store. He told me this story the other day, and I thought it was just unbelievable. So his son is currently attending a school, and when his son is now talking to these girls at this school saying, I come to his place as in Aaron's place, to bake cookies and all that. Legitimately, when I'm not being facetious here. And they all turn up. And these girls are actually impressed by the fact that Aaron is a Doctor Who fan, because Aaron has been in the Doctor Who thing for decades, right? And these young girls, we're talking like late mid to late teenagers, are really dialed into Doctor Who, the new TV series, right? And they actually want to talk to him about Doctor Who. But he can relate the story about when he was in school, nobody wanted to know about it. If anything, he was ostracized by being a fan of science fiction. Now, he stood loud and proud, but he was on his own, right? And even he said there were times where you just want to not say anything to anybody. Fast forward a generation, and then suddenly, even though his son doesn't have an interest in this stuff at all, his son's friends are very much dialed into it. So in one generation, it's been a complete role reversal. And it's just mind-boggling to try and fathom that. And I think that harks back to what Anne said earlier about the quality of the shows and the movies, and the fact that it's now socially acceptable far more than it once was. I think that it's just, when he tells me that, I couldn't believe it. And he showed me photographs. He said, look, these are the girls at his place, and they want to talk to him when they have dinner and they're having food. They want to talk to him about Doctor Who. And he said, shit, if this had happened back in his day, it would have been like the greatest thing ever, but it wasn't to be. So there you go. And you can add Lord of the Rings to the mix, but Lord of the Rings has been around, especially the books have been around for a couple of about 50 years or so. So there you go. And there's just one other thing I wanted to cover off. I remember when I joined fandom, it happened it was in October 1984. It was a theatre group made up of science fiction fans. I walked in, and the first thing I saw, the two things that struck me, there's a long story, but I'm just cutting this right down. One, all the people in there were my age group. So I was only like, 84. So I was only like 15, 16. And there were girls there. And I thought, mate, this is where I want to be. And of course, was it nearly 40 years later, I'm still here, which is kind of cool. There you go. Well, that's right. Yeah, Aaron just can't believe it. He's got all these girls turning up to have a baker, and they're all Doctor Who fans. And his son doesn't give a shit about Doctor Who. So go figure that one, kids. Unbelievable. So there you go. Sorry, what was that?
I think the Doctor Who generation with Aaron's son. You know how sometimes the father's got red hair and the kid doesn't, and then the kid's
yeah. It's the milkman. Yeah, exactly right. Very, very cool. So and Bob, look at old Bob's joining us for the first time. First convention was held in Chicago in '36. That would have been the first ever Worldcon actually, and look where they are today. So the important thing is that for our perspective and everybody watching the show, the world is different. It is much better than it once was, and we can all be loud and proud. But remember, you're a nerd or a geek, if you will, but not a freak, not a dork, and all the rest of it. And good on you, Gavin. Yeah, both is now it's generational. Fans sort of spreading through the generations now, which is absolutely fantastic. And we don't have to be alone like we once were. All right, we are going to sign off the show. There's probably more things we could discuss. We could certainly appreciate the fact that everybody's joined us tonight on this Monday night. Next week, we're out of lockdown, so hopefully you'll all come back and you won't just bugger off and leave us. So, and then somebody out there is still going to be thinking about it, saying, oh, yeah, got to join in with the nerds. I don't know if Claire will be back. Claire will be back, or it'll still be with MPS, but we'll wait and see. Any final words before we sign off, Mr. Dude?
Mr. Dude. I feel like a little Mr. Man. I should be like a little Mr. Man with little hands. And Mr. Dude. Look, I think at the end of the day, follow what you love now, because otherwise you're not going to be happy. I think that's the main sort of message now for anything. Doesn't matter if it's sci-fi, if it's football, if it's stamp collecting or whatever it is. Follow what you love and just love it as much as you can, as much as you want. Who cares what anyone else thinks?
Indeed. And make sure you always do it in the zone. All right. So as words to live by. All right. We'll leave you to it and we'll see you all next week. Bye for now.
Bye.